It was that time of year.
Yeah.
It all just fell off. This was courtesy of Tom. I heard what he was pointing out. He was pointing out that he had wonderful things to say about philosophers and their relationship to mathematics. And it's all wrapped up in this one formula, which I had never heard of.
Really?
I took a picture of it so that I could look it up.
That's in the book I gave you.
That's in the book? I read that book.
Yeah.
I don't remember that formula though.
Talked about Euler's.
However,
Is there a way reverse this? And this is like backwards.
so the anybody want their papers back from last time? If you want them, I have them. I logged everything in, so I still have Jonathan Dyers, Jonathan Megan, Ben, and Greg are not here.
So that can go both ways.
I did get one email from Paul. He's not going to be here. However, Brianna,
Association, we gotta put them
Joseph,
right here.
Reese, not here. There's Reese. You want your test 3 back, I suppose?
Sure.
Otherwise, I just throw them out. So.
Change to P times
Paul is not coming to me. Jacob is not here. Sarah?
Yep.
It was just 2 pages, right? Thick. Louis? Did you staple them all together, or just? Is that it?
I think mine is staple too. Thank you, sir.
Careful with paper cuts.
Yes,
Cindy. I just want to say Cindy Lou Who. That's a joke. Are you familiar with the Who's in Whoville?
Yes.
Warren. Yep. Is that all of them, I think? I didn't write anything on any of them. I just gave everybody an A.
Okay.
Oh, here's.
I think we have
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think that the main concern I have is to introduce the material that is included on the 4th test, which you should email me before August 4th. My grades have to be in by August 8th, but I actually have to have them in earlier than that because I go out drinking that night.
So if we don't get our, you can't, then therefore you can't go out there.
love my Wednesday nights. It's not that the drinking is such a big thing, it's the conversation that's the big thing. And the wine is not even mandatory. You can have beer if you like. Or actually, Eric, I don't know if you know Eric. I don't know if Eric wants his name thrown all around. It's like name dropping. It's fun to do, but Eric doesn't drink alcohol, so he usually has a Sprite. So but he's in his 80s. That's pretty cool. And Bob is 92, and he'll most often just drink water. Every once in a while he'll have wine. Like his birthday, he had wine.
Hey, you got a haircut and a trim.
I did.
Looking good.
Here's just that one thing.
I thought, well, there's 10 questions, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. No, this is it. Did you grade it or?
Yeah, well, everyone that was here got an A.
Oh, okay, cool. The vending machine is selling hot drinks. If anybody wants.
Just moved them so they're not cold yet.
I think it's both of ours. Yeah.
Wow, my dad, my friend literally one time brought in sodas that were actually like, okay, it's like they were reminder, like, it's like, anyone want one drink? We didn't specify, they were like, never mind.
Okay, so the fourth test, please email me before
Did you get a haircut?
this one over here. This one too. Actually, I got a lot of them. I just took my trimmer. You know how. So yes, it was free. By the way, I haven't paid for a haircut since 1978. I keep offering to do my wife's haircuts too, but she never lets me.
I don't see that happening anytime soon.
No. However, so with regard to that test, how many of you have gone online and clicked on final and looked at it? Okay, so the first part of it is a translation. So that's what I'm thinking. I need to explain how that works in case you don't know. The one site, for the essay, that's how do we solve the Alaska budget? So if you looked at that, the site that it links to is a couple years old at least.
So the
So
Alaska fiscal crisis.
right. But from that site, if you're curious, you can link to our contemporary Alaska finance pages and so on. But still, it's an interesting opportunity for you to write what you think about Alaska's situation, where we ought to trim the budget or increase it, how we could increase it, where the money could come from, all that kind of stuff. That should be fun. And notice there's nothing you could say that would be wrong there. So, and I don't even ask for a minimum number of words, so you could just flip me the bird, I suppose. I don't. What is that? You imagine like a little catapult. You put the poor little bird there, and just. That's kind of the way a Monty Python would handle the problem. Right? Of course, they would fling a cow. You familiar with that? How the run away! That's just hilarious. I can imagine. Sorry. Should never mention the Monty Python when you're trying to discuss anything serious, because of course that just totally ruins everything. Okay, so that's easy. Basically, the test is a give me. I think if there is one other question. I should really have tried to fix it, and that is asking you every week you look in better and better shape. I don't know how that happens. Hey, Stephanie. what exercise does, oh, I did yours, you sent it to me.
I did.
Yes, yes. Okay, so, and that's compared to analogical arguments. I'll talk about that too when we get to it. Okay, so what's the reason for the translation? What is all of that stuff? Well, as I mentioned a couple of times while we were doing the symbolic logic section, I pointed out that we were lying to you, that that's not all there is, because real statements have lots more to them than just P or Q, right? So it's not just a matter of whether the statement's true or false, although that's, of course, an important feature of it, and the truth tables are all important and so on. But when we look at the kinds of statements that you can have, if you remember, we have all S is P, no S is P. Some S is P, and some S is not. So we have four types of statements that can be true or false when you get right down to it. By the way, I keep saying that, and these are the statements that are contingent statements. So they're contingent based on whether they correspond to the real world. So when you talk about that being a bottle of Golden Peak sweet tea, that's fortunately a true statement. It's a statement of type this a statement, because it's all of that particular bottle. I was obviously referring specifically to it, is in the set of things that are Gold Peak sweet tea, right? Pretty easy to see how that works. But there are other kinds of statements that we've discovered in symbolic logic that are also true and false, that are not true and false because of their correspondence to actual situations. And those are tautologies, which are true all the time, and contradictions, which are false all the time. And their tautologies are true all the time, and contradictions are false all the time, only because of their grammatical arrangement, their syntax, really, right? So, in a matter of speaking, that's still true to say that the only kinds of statements that are true or false are these four, because the tautologies and the contradictions that we can form are actually combinations of statements that are based on one or more, well, actually, it has to be at least two of these statements in an arrangement, right? And so that's really dependent on the logical operators, the and, the or, the not, and the combination logical operators like the horseshoe and the tri-bar and so on, right? So even though it seems like I might be wrong in saying that these are the only kinds of statements that are true and false, that's at the basis of what we're talking about when we refer to statements that are true or false. You can't get smaller than this. Ugh is not a statement, right? Neither is it true or false. Questions are neither true nor false. Imperatives, neither true nor false. Have to be declarative statements of one of these four forms, right? So, when we're talking about P and Q, we're obviously ignoring these four types of statements. But if you're going to use symbols to really represent what people are saying and analyze the logic of their arguments, you have to have a deeper or a more rich set of symbols to express these. So, what we deal with then is quantification theory, however you want to talk about it. Why quantification? how many? How many are we talking about, right? And so we use, at least in our book, and there are other fonts or other systems, but once you recognize one, you'll recognize all of them, I think, right? Because they're that similar, right? So we use the variable x in parentheses to represent all. So all, right? If x is s, then x is p. That's how you would read that. So notice this is just if s then p, but what I'm talking about is for all x. So everything you pick that is x is also p, right? This one is also a universal, so I'm still going to use the same kind of quantifier for all x, but then I'm going to say if x is s, then it is not the case that x is p. No s is p, right? So that's the added symbols that we could use for an A statement. Remember, these are A statements. E statement. The quantifier for particular statements is different because we're not talking about for anything you pick. We're talking about sum. So what we use here in this book, and quite a few of them, by the way, is a backward E x in parentheses. It's the quantifier. And then we have, so sum x is s and p. You think, well, why didn't I use the horseshoe here? I'm not saying if there is one s that is one x that is s, then it is also p. No, what I'm actually talking about is of all the bottles in this room, there is one that is Gold Peak. So it is both that one, a bottle, and that particular one, right? Pretty easy. It's actually very easy if you think about it. It's one of those things you could easily make seem more complex than it is, but that's all it is. And so this is an I statement. And then the O statement. So there exists an x such that x is s and not p. Some s is not p, right? So you could even read it this way: some s is p, some s is not p. It's just that here's the symbolic expression for that. Now, when you first start reading about these symbols, though, they will give you statements that are much simpler. For example, we could say Socrates is mortal. So the capital letter, the large letter, right, represents the predicate, and I'm predicating something to a particular individual. So in this case, I'm not using a variable, I'm using Socrates. So Socrates is mortal. And Socrates is Greek, for example, right? So you could do it, you could do that. And that works if I'm talking about specific individuals that I know for sure. So I'm just talking about one particular individual. I say something like, all men are mortal. Now you could see a reason for having the symbols, because I would have to say, for anything you pick, if it is what should we use for man? P. How about P as in person, right? So if it is a person, then it is mortal. I have to use this because I'm talking about all. All men are mortal. And in that case, then, I'm not talking about a specific individual like Socrates. I'm talking about the universal. For anything that fits that predicate, then it is also mortal, right? Is that confusing? Am I going too fast? The book goes slower, I suppose. But this leads us to an interesting argument. Since all men are mortal, Socrates is a man. Notice we want to say, well then, so Socrates must be mortal. The trouble is, if I put it into the computer like this, it can't solve it. Because PS is not PX. Plus this is bound by the quantifier. This is the main operator in this whole statement. And so you can't play with this without getting it out of there in the first place. And so once we've created these quantifiers, we now have to create rules that enable you to get in and out of them. So for example, we have UI, which stands for Universal Instantiation. Universal Instantiation. These are in the book if you, anybody see what page we're on and want to follow along that way.
There's a summary on the back flag.
But universal instantiation basically says, okay, if I have a statement that talks about all of the members of a set, I can instantiate, give an instance, right? So Socrates is an instance of man. So since all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, it only makes sense for us to know, when we say all men are mortal, that Socrates is an example of that. So we can instantiate this and say PS then MS. Socrates is a man, PS, then Socrates is mortal, MS. And how did I get to this from this? So if I have this listed as 1, 2, this is 3. What I've done here is I used universal instantiation on 1. And the particular individual I instantiated was Socrates. So I could use universal instantiation to get out of being stuck the way I was here. But now that I've done this, I can see that modus ponens will give me Socrates is mortal, modus ponens, thanks to 2 and 3. So all I needed was universal instantiation to go from all men are mortal, and by the way, Socrates is an instance of that, So therefore, Socrates, being a man, is also mortal. Notice I would also need UG as another rule, because if it turned out that I wanted my conclusion of an argument to end up in a universal statement, so that all, so say for example, I wanted to conclude that all men are mortal, right? Then I would have to go from the instance that Socrates is a man, and so then Socrates is mortal, to all men. But there's a problem here, and that is that, well, just because Socrates is a man and that makes him mortal, doesn't mean that George, being a man, is also mortal. Where's the proof? Socrates was a man, and notice he's dead, as far as we know, right? And when Lao Tzu might still be out there somewhere, right? You're familiar with the Tao, Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu, who's a Chinese philosopher, gave us the way. Lao Tzu, however you want to pronounce it. Theoretically, Lao Tzu never died. He was so perfect with the way. He's kind of like Yoda. He's out there somewhere in the mountains, living perfectly in harmony with nature. Right? Not that anyone's seen him, etc. But who knows? Maybe George is the same way. Maybe George won't die, right? Well, so in order for me to go from a particular statement about a particular individual to a universal, I have to have restrictions on the rule, and the restriction is that you can't use universal generalization unless the particular individual that you are applying it to was first an instantiation of UI in the first place. So you have to limit what the computer does, otherwise you get some really weird results. So, unlooked for complication of a result of all of this, right? So, when you're dealing with universal statements, you have universal instantiation to get rid of the universal quantifier in the first place. And then if your conclusion requires it, then you have universal generalization to put it back into a universal statement. And notice, I also have the same thing for existential quantifiers. So I can have existential instantiation. Now there's actually some other rules associated with that. The easiest one, by the way, with regard to restrictions is universal instantiation. Because, I mean, if all the members of the set are this, well then it doesn't matter. Pick anything you like. It's that, right? But if you're talking about, somebody murdered this person. Whoever murdered this person was 6 foot and used their left hand to use the knife. Right? So I want to be the detective, Dick Tracy, Richard Tracy, Sir Richard Tracy, I don't know.
Great movie.
Whatever. I want to be him, and I want to try to figure this out. So I'm going to logically analyze this. Well, so I'm going to change this from existential instantiation into a particular. So I'm going to blame Sarah. She's 6 foot. Not. Well, but you get the idea, right? We pick Sarah. Well, if Sarah came in, she's 6 foot and she's left-handed, we're just playing with this here, right? Then this would have happened, etc. So therefore, we go out and arrest Sarah? No, that's dumb, because we were just using Sarah as an instantiation to think about how the murder might have occurred, right? But you have to have a restriction on existential instantiation, and that is that when the argument's over, you must get rid of the particular and go back to someone, right? You can't end up by blaming, a particular individual when what you were really doing was thinking about someone did this, then they did this, then they did this. So we're thinking about, I don't really know who did it, but notice when we use our imagination, we generally have to think of a particular individual really doing it. For the most part, we don't pick someone we know. I think we can imagine Peter Pan or something. I don't know.
So it's like a proxy kind of thing.
Right,
Is it
right.
a proxy?
Right.
Or sign?
But the rule is, but then you have to get out of that, because otherwise you're like, you might be an idiot and go after the person just that you made up, to do that. So don't do that. Now, actually, whenever I think of someone being stabbed, I think of the poor guy that got stabbed at the corner of the Sears Mall, about 15 times? Was it? Something like that.
I hear about this.
Stabbed in the back, both sides of the back, in other places. Did he die? I don't think so. And then the woman that was arrested for it, did you hear what she said? Some guy saw you doing it. It was like 2:30 in the afternoon, right? And so they had a picture of her, so the police knew who they were looking for, so they arrested her, and what did she say? Well, that's why you should kill people at night. She was mad. Should have killed him at night, and then no one would have seen me do it. Yeah, next time. She's probably out on bail, because of course we don't have room in jail for her. Just tell her, no, don't do that again until after we. I'm just kidding. No, I'm not. Yes, I am. No, I'm not. I don't know. All I know is that I'm not going to walk in that area. I'll just drive by. Although that's not necessarily safer. Although now I guess people are taking to driving with body armor on. Did you see that?
Oh, well, that kind of weird case too.
Oh, Lord, I don't know. Reading the news is funny anymore, if it weren't sad at the same time. By the way, I'm not going to ride motorcycles, especially around the corner here. Last night, by the way, around 2:30 in the morning, it sounded like motorcycles were having a race down Eagle River Loop. I don't know.
I heard that. I heard them.
You
heard
heard
it?
I don't know, I heard them on the highway too, because like the place backs right up to the highway.
Yeah. Can we watch? Are these scheduled events that you could go and sit with flags?
Yeah, sit on the overpass.
I don't know. They should post when they're going to do this so we could go out and cheer them
Yeah,
on.
maybe we could bet on it.
Yeah. Oh well. So, existential instantiation. And last but least, I usually say last but not least, but I just said last but least. E.g., existential generalization. And that's where you get out of instantiating a particular individual to think the proxy, as J.D. said, right? You don't really want to go out and arrest the proxy. You want to end with someone. Someone did something or other, right? I don't know who, but someone did something. So these are just the 4 rules that you get on the back. And it's also interesting that thanks to Willard Van Orman Quine in 1952, it totally upset all of the philosophers that have ever lived, except for Lao Tzu, who no one told about it. He's in China somewhere. As far as I know, he never heard. But what Willard Van Orman Quine discovered, and it's in Two Dogmas of Empiricism. You ever feel like reading really hotsy-totsy philosophy from 1952? Two Dogmas of Empiricism. It's certainly still under copyright, but nonetheless, it's easy to find on the web for free. So if you're interested, Two Dogmas of Empiricism. What we discovered, I think I actually mentioned this earlier in the class, and that is that if you have a statement that's for anything you can pick, it's equivalent to saying it's not the case that there is something that is not that. Remember I did this? On the other hand, you say, for anything you pick, it's not this. That's equivalent to saying it's not the case that there is something that is that. If you say it's not the case that for anything you pick, it is this. That's equivalent to saying there is something that is not that. And if you say that it's not the case that for anything you pick, it's not this, that's equivalent to there is something that is that. And this is called quantifier exchange, or what's the name of it in this book?
Change of quant.
Change of quantifier. Oh, and if you're looking at the little chart in the book, the reason they have Greek letters there, those Greek letters are replacing non-Greek letters. What letters would they have been? S, I guess. Because they didn't want to confuse you by making you think that they were talking about specific letters. So they use Greek. You caught on to this, right? Just use a Greek letter to make it seem more abstract, right?
Give you a more academic feeling to it.
Yeah, that's good. So that's why they have them like that. But notice, if you look at the pattern that I have here, I did that exactly the same, correct? See the pattern? It's under inference rules for predicate logic in the back cover.
I think the third and fourth are just reversed in the book, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, I like the way I did it better. So there.
There you go.
But the rule is basically you can change the quantifier provided you put a negation sign in front of the new quantifier and behind it. So I think we could thank Professor Quine for that. And by the way, this enabled people to realize that for about 2,000 or more years, the arguments between what is referred to as analytic knowledge, which are definitional knowledge, all horses are animals. It's an example of an analytic knowledge, right? You don't have to go out and specifically examine a horse. You know if it's a horse, then it's an animal, right? And synthetic knowledge, which is that horse, is a mare. It turns out that all analytic knowledge is translatable or equivalent to synthetic statements, and vice versa. So the Greeks and on arguing about two different kinds of knowledge are actually wrong. They created a problem that wasn't really there. By the way, if you get into philosophy, the history of philosophy, you can see where this really is very nice for American pragmatists. American pragmatists argue that we don't have this a priori knowledge in our head that automatically leads us to view things according to that prior analytic knowledge, but instead we're constantly updating our database of information by having new experiences. So we're always open to learning something new, which is a good point of view to have as an American pragmatist. We're never just always ironclad in our beliefs. We're always open to getting new information. Does that make sense? However, so now if you're writing an article, submitting it to a journal, and one of the requirements in submitting your article is that you have to accompany the article with your argument in symbolic language. This is the kind of language that they're looking for. You can't just use P's and Q's. You have to use the full thing. And by the way, UAA does not have an advanced logic course. We've, for years since we started the philosophy BA program, wanted to have one because we know that our graduates that go on to graduate work in philosophy will need it, but we haven't been able to afford the professor to teach it and the time slot to do it because of budget. It was always something we'd like to add, and that's where you would really have gotten into a lot of this. I'm just introducing it to you so you know what the heck it is, right? That's all. And there are other fonts out there. The one that I see the most that I notice is you'll see an upside down A with an X without parentheses. When you see that, that's the same as this.
So why don't they just use that?
Why?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what
If it's
market
the same as
forces-
X in parentheses, why don't they just use that? It says it's spelling something now.
I don't know why. It's market changes. Somebody came up with it.
Some
And-
textbooks?
And then the same thing with this. Basically, they'll still go like this, but again, they drop the parentheses for some reason. But if you're used to the pattern, recognizing that there are 4 basic types of statements, then you've got it. But even though this is available, we still in everyday speech use compound statements, which are not necessarily going to fit in these different ways. The four 8EIO statement types. I might, for example, say something like, I gave the ball to George. I think the easiest way to think of this would be to say, I'm in the set of things, that's me, basically, and gave the ball to George would be the predicate for that. But to be more specific, we will have the issue of say, giving the ball is one, and it wouldn't even be giving the ball, it's giving in general. would be the predicate. So then we would have, say, W for William gave the ball to George. So William gave the ball to George. Pick 3. So this is what's referred to as a relational. You could get into arguments over, is Aristotle right that there's only 4 types of true or false statements? Because strictly speaking, this could be true or false. Did I give the ball to George? Yes. Right. If that's the case. Is this an AEIO statement? It's a relational predicate. Could we analyze it in such a way that we could make it an A statement, which I think we ought to be able to do? But if you're trying to say that Aristotle's logic is inadequate to all the different kinds of statements we could make that are true or false. And relational predicates are an example of statements that are beyond what his system encompasses. But you can imagine all the complexity involved in people arguing over this kind of thing. In any case, I gave you a basic dictionary in order to explain what I was doing here. I'm using the capital G as my predicate, and I'm using small letters W for William, B for ball, and G for George, right? So I give you a dictionary basically to do that. Now I'll show you how the translation schemas on the test work. Hopefully I've given you enough of a background on this, because I'm sure it's just kind of slapdash. Remember, tonight we also have to cover all the rest of the book, which you bought that book. I don't want you to feel like, hey, he never covered John Stuart Mill or something. You know. So, by the way, notice the quantifier exchange. That's one of the questions on the test too. But by the way, all you have to do is change whatever quantifier there is on the test with the other one and put a negation sign in front of it and behind it. And what changes, what happens afterwards, is a result of double negation. So if you have 2 there as a result of that, obviously you could also just remove both of them. So it looks like instead of adding a negation sign, you removed one. But that's all that is. So that's worth 5 points, and it's as easy as that. You don't even have to think, really. Yes? Do you see what I mean?
So it'd be like, I just lost it. Hold on.
Lost it?
No,
Uh-oh,
it's like,
somebody
I
help her
lost it
get
on my screen, there it is. So it'd be like PX, or, hold on. There are no,
X.
it would just be PX, or shoe.
Something like that. I'm just trying to say it out loud.
That's just like math. You see the symbols, you might know even what they are, but you don't know how to pronounce what the heck we just read.
And they can put down what he said on that sheet and then transpose it onto your email.
Did any of that make sense, by the way? cents. It could be 55 cents. But it won't pay the toll, that's for sure. That's why you need ETI. The mouse, oh no, I lost the mouse. Mouse. Yes. Yes.
I just did exactly how he showed it. So, all of this is over with the not this. That's exactly how he
So,
Yeah. That's right.
so the question where you're using the quantifier exchange rule, or rule change of quantifier, whatever you want to call it, is this one? You see that?
Yes.
So in this particular case, I have not the case for anything you pick. If x is p, then it's not the case that x is q. It's basically an E statement, although it's actually kind of interesting. What would you call it with the negation sign out in front of it? In any case, all you have to do is put a second negation sign in front of this one, or delete both of them, because double negation means if you have two, it's equivalent to having none. So I would have there exists an x, and then I have to put another negation sign here, so it's not the case that, and then you just put this. It's like as easy as possible, right? Cheap 5 points, right? Is that easy?
But we do use the existential qualifier, the bracket is E.
Yes, you're
Yeah,
changing the quantifier.
So
So you're going from a universal to a particular.
Yes.
If you think about it, if you, yes.
No, you get, this is like subject, so you just gonna.
So if I say all horses are animals,
I made some copies of it.
it's logically equivalent to say
So that I could.
it's not the case that there is something that is not a horse that is an animal. So the affirmative, actually in this case, we're saying not the case. But, so if I say all horses are animals, what's the equivalent synthetic statement of that? I have to put a negation sign in front, negation sign in the back, and I have to switch it to an exists something, right? So if I'm going from all horses are that would be for anything you pick. If it's a horse, then it's an animal. Then the equivalent of this would be not the case, there exists an X such that it's not the case that it's a horse, then it's an animal, right? So it's not the case. This phrase, by the way, is I think the easiest way to handle the negation sign that's in front of something. You probably have heard that. It's kind of an academic phrase that you see all over the place, right? It's not the case that there is, 'cause that's what this means, right? There is something that is not. Now what I've got to try to figure out is how would I put this? And really it should be both a horse and not an animal. If I change this, so what I'm saying is it's not the case that there is something that is a horse and not an animal. So that would be the synthetic statement that's equivalent to saying that all horses are animals. Right? So you're actually talking about a synthetic situation. So the equivalence does work. You might have to go through some other shenanigans in order to show how that works. But it works. So that's problem 2. But here's this is fun. So here's our dictionary. I'm using capital T small x equals x is a person, is a librarian, will earn an A in logic. BXY is a relational predicate, so x borrowed y. HXY, x studies harder than y, so another relational example. X is nocturnal. A lot of these are not even going to be used, but I took an entire dictionary from a particular test set and then I applied, but I only gave you 3 examples of this. By the way, notice especially this one here, this is referred to as the non-identity clause. And when you get into this kind of symbolic logic, people often say, hey, everyone's here. Well, but not really, because there's like 8 billion people in the world. I really didn't mean that. So if I told the computer, everyone is here, and the computer thought, well, there's 8 billion people, it's probably trying to figure out how 8 billion people could all be snuggled into one little room in Eagle River, right? So remember, you tell screwy things to a computer and it will kill you. At least if its name is Hal, right? So that's kind of important. Be careful. And as far as they've figured out, the rules of robotics that Asimov invented don't really work. You familiar with that at all? Isaac Asimov, the 3 rules of robotics. robots are not allowed to harm human beings.
They have to do, I learned it last year, it's weird.
You did?
Yeah, and I took a, what is it? Like a science fiction class through school.
Uh-huh.
Weird.
Well, the
Cool.
thing about a science fiction class like that is awful lot of that is here.
We read
Already.
iRobot, and then this weird thing about, what was it called? It was about like the sense of being like Earth was in 50 years was going to be completely damaged unless like these people came, and the people taught like the people on Earth how to like live, and it was this whole, it was so weird. I cannot remember the name of it though. The Overlords?
Could be. I'm not familiar with it. Lots of things similar, though.
Yeah.
But, yeah. I think I mentioned last week that I very rarely mow my lawn. I did mow it the other day. But I always feel so guilty, you know. Here I am,
lawn until you mow.
I'm out there mowing the clover, and all these poor little bees are. But you can't. We're busy here. We're, you know. And I'm like.
Did you mow your yard and shave your beard and cut your hair all on the same day?
No,
That would have been the.
No, that's too
Jameson's
much.
trifecta.
too much.
That would've been-
Too much. I did vacuum the rug though. So that's too bad. Okay, so here's an example. So say you're reading somebody's PhD thesis in a journal or whatever, right? That actually happens still, right? And you're trying to figure out what on earth is that all about, right? Well, for one thing, I've got some of the letters backwards because I didn't have the font, right? But so there exists an X, that for all Y. So by the way, you can combine quantifiers. Because if I'm talking about someone studied harder than everyone, is that what I'm doing here?
Yeah.
HXY, right? X studies harder than Y. Check.
Wait.
So HX, by the way, you have a trick in this test set. Yes, sure.
But A, you have a misuse of parentheses on the bottom. Because you have a double parenthesis and a single parenthesis.
Yeah, that was my fault.
Okay, I'm just.
There should be that. You're right. There should be. Actually, I don't need
You
the
got,
two.
you
I really
too
should have
many.
just had one.
One. So just ignore
Yeah, just
double.
ignore that.
Okay.
But, so what's the translation of that? There exists an X, so there's, the X is over here, and that is a person, which means
There
it's
exists a
someone.
person.
So someone, all of this ends up, someone, who's X, right, studied harder than Y, and Y is for anything you pick. So Y is everything. So someone studies harder than everything. Because we don't say that Y is a person. If I had PX and PY, right? And then X studies harder than everyone. But now there is an interesting problem here because now I've got whoever that person is studying harder than everyone, including themselves. So you've got one of those goofy loops, right? You know, so and there's no help for it. It wasn't fixed, right? That's where the non-identity clause helps, where you have, it's not the case that X is identical to Y, and that way, if we had done that here, you would have fixed that stupid loop, and you wouldn't have had somebody studies harder than everything. I would have had everyone. Even if it's everything, strictly speaking, a person is a thing. Sorry about that. you know, in the big picture, right? And as a result, you still get this goofy loop that
Can you convert it to an idiom? Can you say the person studies harder than anything?
oh, yes, yes. In fact, that's part of the fluent speaker is going to be able to do that, right? You know, you're not wrong if you say, you know, it is not the case that, but no one actually speaks that way. So, yeah, trying to convert these into real fluent English or French. I mean, it could be, French scholars use the same system, right? So, yeah, you can end up with better and better translations of it. But these, of course, being a test, a logic test, are going to be silly. Especially when we get down to, you know, X is a librarian, whatever. Well, so this one basically, notice I just sort of gave it to you.
You can keep going, I enjoy it.
Okay.
I like it, it's helping me understand.
Well, that's the goal.
Thank you.
Hopefully,
So this
hopefully
next one-
someday you will actually see stuff like this and you'll say, Professor Jamison told us that this day would happen.
Like when you talked about the 3 laws of robotics, I never thought
Yeah.
I'd hear that again.
You never know. You never know. The Luzak just yesterday, I think it was, had a Harry Potter Quidditch game. It's not my fault, but my granddaughter went, so that's kind of fun. That's kind of neat. Hopefully they didn't throw her through one of the hoops. No.
Do
I
that
should have
many
lent her
people-
my wand, you know.
Do that many people know how to play that?
You know, I think that's one of the most dangerous sports ever invented.
Like polo.
Because you've got all these guys running around with a broom between their legs, and it could be crippling.
Like polo. Like polo's dangerous.
Bike polo.
Yes, it's like polo but on bikes.
At least they don't have bike frisbee.
That'd be
They will
awful.
tomorrow.
They will.
Because I will be they, and I will do it. It's a case stupid game. I play stupid games.
Bike frisbee with trash can lids instead of frisbee.
I have seen bike joust and trash can lids.
Okay. So let's do this one. There exists a y such that for all x, x is a person, and it's not the case that x is identical to y, then x is more logical than y. Am I reading that right?
Yeah.
But that's terrible. No one actually speaks that way. Really, this is the whole sentence right here. Right here. This is the whole sentence.
Don't mind my head first.
And what you want to say is someone. No, it's everyone actually, right? For all x.
Right.
So everybody, because we're talking about persons, is more logical than something else. Everyone is more logical than something else. Because they're not identical, so it is something else. So everybody is more logical than something else.
And the plus sign represents and, we already said that, right? The plus
Yes.
sign represents and, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. I could use a period there, but it looks funny. So that's that one. Yeah. X is used instead of the dot.
So for the next one, what is LY? Would that be
So-
LX?
Is more logical.
So this one, you have to look at the, you know, so it's a trap. It's a trap.
A librarian.
So when you have a relational predicate with an L, you have X is more logical than Y. By the way, you can have LYX, which would mean Y is more logical than X, right? So this is a guide, right? And LX, X is a librarian. So be careful, capital L doesn't mean the same thing in both relational predicates and non-relational predicates. It's different. So in this particular case, we're saying X is more logical than Y, and it's not the case that Y is a librarian. And it's a particular librarian, whereas X we're talking about everything is more logical than something that's not a librarian. Everything is more logical than something that is not a librarian. They're dumb. These are just crazy.
So why is something? Or is it
Yeah, Y is just some.
just some?
And that literally can mean some or many, except all. It wouldn't be all,
Okay.
because X stands for all. So that's all those are. So sorry about that. Hopefully you had fun puzzling these out.
I like it.
If you like, I've got a whole shitload. I've got lots of these that you can
whole
do.
boatload.
A boatload, yes, that you can play with. And we've done the quantifier, the short essay response, so analogical reasoning. What chapter is that?
It says page 492 and 493.
Analogical argument. So I'm sure in this edition that's not the right page.
Chapter 9.
It is chapter 10. So we are
Oh,
talking
I'm on the
about.
wrong page. Wait. I'm on the right one.
So
Exercise
analogical.
9E.
521?
Yeah, it's got to be an
520.
exercise.
9E. And this one.
It's from chapter 10, you said?
Yeah, 521.
Yeah, so 521 is, or 520? Nope, 520. It's funny how these numbers don't look the same when you don't have glasses. I left my glasses in the car. Good place for them. On page 524, I have a note to self, fix problem number 4 in the final.
What does that mean?
It means I haven't done what I told myself to do.
We may never know. We should just forget about it.
But that means that the exercise that's drawn from is not on page 492, 494,
Or anywhere.
unless you have the older book.
Yes.
But so it's instead from page 524 to, so pick 2 of the even numbered analogies, like problem 2,
What pages?
chimpanzee,
525.
524 is problem number 2. Chimpanzees are certainly capable of feeling pain. They will avoid negative feedback, electrical shock, in a laboratory setting when given the opportunity to do so. When one chimpanzee is injured, others will recognize the pain, behavior, and try to comfort and help the injured member of the group. Chimpanzees that have been given pain relief medicine soon after an injury connect the medicine to the relief from pain and become addicted to the opioids, and then, no, I'm sorry. Slipping into the news. That's why we have all these chimpanzees running around addicted to opioids, trying to get a fix, stealing everybody's bicycle, which explains why we have all these chimpanzees riding stolen bicycles. That might not be funny, depends. If you've lost a bicycle to a chimpanzee.
If a chimpanzee wants to steal my bicycle, they can just have it. I'm not trying to get in that fight.
Actually, I have a couple bicycles that people are welcome to have. How come they never come around my place and steal stuff from me? I'm stuck with all this stuff. I'm never going to ride.
I take my
What I
stuff
need to
by
do
the
is-
van load to the dumpster on base. So
Oh, I need to have a yard sale. And I have a yard now because I mowed the lawn. So, analogical arguments. Notice that the word analogical, A-N-A, is the Greek root that means, the prefix that means the same as the Latin prefix that is spelled R-E. How else would you say that? It's the same as the Latin prefix RE. It's one of the advantages of English. We're such a hodgepodge. When people don't understand a word, you could explain it in another English word that uses a different foreign language.
isn't that true of most languages though?
I think there are some languages that don't have that many words. Remember I had the one young lady from Samoa that wanted to learn. Pardon?
Yeah,
Like Hawaiian language.
I guess that would make sense though, because the islands are all pretty isolated. They develop their own
Right.
thing.
She wanted to learn big words, and so we got a thesaurus out, and she started looking at like the word kid, child, taught, infant, rugrat, all that stuff. And she was, why are there so many words? Because in Samoan, she said there was only one word for all of those, as far as she knew. Well, I mean, how do you even translate that?
A rat that lives in a rug. Rugrat.
No, well, all of them. How do you translate a toddler into a language that only has one word for all the kinds of words you could use for a non-adult? There was a commercial on the radio the other day where a woman was arguing that the law that they're trying to write into effect protecting salmon from mining and, pardon?
Prop 1.
Travel mind.
Well, her argument was that it would basically do away with all mining opportunities and development in order to protect the fish. Well, I understand the concern, right? You've got to protect the fish, but if it seems like every dang thing you do is going to damage fish habitat, well, then you're never going to be allowed to do anything developmental-wise. Might be good, I don't know. But her response to it was then to give I guess a Yupik expression that basically means, have you heard the commercial?
Yeah, I've seen the ad, and I thought the same thing. She says it will endanger all jobs, basically, is what she says.
Yeah, she basically refers to it as stupid, basically.
Irresponsible
And
and something.
she gives the Yupik expression for it. And I mean, I've got a Yupik dictionary at home, thanks to my wife. She bought, one Christmas she said, "What would you like for Christmas?" And I said, "Oh, you pick it."
Yeah.
Yupik dictionary. I have an Athabascan dictionary too, which is really unique because there's actually 4 different languages in there. And so there's 4 different sections. So if you're looking up a word in Athabascan, you have to also figure out which of the 4 languages, because they're all in alphabetical order separately. But when you listen to her explain what that native word meant that she just used, she used an English expression that was quite abstract, and it occurred to me that probably a closer translation to what she was saying was, it would be like putting both legs in one pant leg.
That's the Sheedy translation versus the Wood translation. You ever heard that one? With languages? They use a lot of every language uses colloquialisms. So we say "make your bed." The Sheedy translation is what we interpret the translation to be. Make your bed. Hey, fluff your pillow. Make your blankets look nice. But the Wood translation is, hack down a tree, hammer together some wood, and make the bed.
Ah.
That's why a lot of those don't translate that well.
Well, that's, I think there's that kind of a problem. Did you ever see the movie Never Cry Wolf? No one? Never Cry Wolf?
Tonight now.
It's kind of interesting. It's about a National Geographic photographer and writer who is dumped in Alaska to do a study on wolves for the magazine. And so the plane loads him up with all of his stuff and literally flies him into the middle of nowhere, lands on a frozen lake, unpacks everything in the plane, and then the guy says, "See you in the spring," and flies off. And first he realizes he's on a frozen lake.
Is that Charles Martin Smith? Is that?
That's
Sorry.
Never
Director
Cry
is
Wolf.
Carol Ballard, starring Charles Martin Smith.
Oh, look at that. Yeah. I never saw the movie.
It's really funny, scary in places. They basically
That's
just
terrifying.
leave this guy sitting there with a boat in a frozen lake. And he's opening the crates that they gave him, and they gave him canned goods with no can opener, a crate of light bulbs. Notice he has no generator. It's like this is meant to kill him, basically, But he does survive it, and so on. But one of the funniest scenes is he starts in his analysis of the wolves. He realizes, and this is great because now I'm getting into an analogical argument here, right? He's looking at the wolves, and he's trying to figure out, what do they eat? Because these are big predators, and there's nothing else there except the wolves. So he's watching them, and it finally dawns on him that they are eating something. It's in the snow. They're like digging into the snow, eating something. And digging in the snow and eating something. And he finally figures out that he's sitting there in his tent with all of these mice all over the place. And he realizes the wolves are eating mice. And he wondered, can a large predator, hey, a human is a large animal like a wolf. Analogical argument, right? If a human can live off of mice, then they can live off of mice. So he started eating mice. It's not funny? Okay, sorry. What was funny, of course, in the movie is he's like holding the mice in between crackers.
Oh.
you know those crackers that, you know, and you see the little tail sticking as he's got them all lined up, you know, and he's just eating the mice. And so at one point, a native comes by with an elder on a dog sled, and they stop by and say hello to him, and they're wondering, what is he eating? And he says, mice. And the native elder gives a really long, I'm sorry, I'm absolutely butch. It is beautiful, of course, language, etc., but it's long. And the young man who's can translate for him looks at him and says, grandfather says that's interesting. And you know that that's not really what he said. So, but analogical arguments, you have a repeat. Notice analogical repeat, so I'm using the Latin. It's relogical, the same pattern used twice. So the idea of an analogical argument is you take a pattern and you then try to reapply that pattern and assume that since it works, the argument works in this pattern, it should work in this one. Wolves can live off of mice because men can live off of mice. Analogical arguments. So you're looking at how strong an analogical argument can you construct, right? Can you have overlapping comparisons, etc. A good analogy opens up new ways of thinking. And by the way, it seems like almost every argument we come up with in inductive reasoning turns out to be an analogical argument. Of course, the problem we have with analogical arguments is that they're basically unsound because we have also mathematical arguments. Mathematical arguments are deductive. So everyone knows 1 + 1 = 2. All squares have 4 sides. Triangles have 3 sides. All that kind of thing, right? Why is mathematics so absolutely certain? And everything else seem, by comparison, not very certain. Well, number one, we could argue and say that mathematics is not based on reality. Mathematics is a symbolic system, a deductive system. That the Greeks and for sure the Egyptians invented, the Indians in India, right, invented, right? So if you think it goes all the way back to the first uses of symbols at all, a lot of the symbols were meant apparently to calculate how much grain farmer A deposited with the state, how much grain farmer B deposited, right? How much we owe them, etc. So they were basically trying to calculate and so on. So math seems to be as old as writing, I guess. In any case, mathematics is absolute. Your mother was the same, when you came home from school and you were, well, this would have been a male, right? Females would have come home and would have said 2 + 2 = 4. Mom says, very good. But you're a boy, so you come home and you say 2 + 2 = 5 because you want to tease your mother. And your mother's response is, no, 2 + 2 = 4. And you being a boy, you want to continue to tease your mother, so you say, 2 + 2 = 5. And so mom has to go, no, 2 + 2 = 4. Because you can't mess with math, right? There's no how. I'm getting too old for that. You get the idea, right? There's no ambiguity in mathematics, although, I shouldn't say that. There are some problems that become, but the thing is, you actually never find out anything new in mathematics. Everything that you find out in math is actually already there. Right?
It's discovered.
But it's not like you discovered, hey, there are oranges growing in Alaska. Wow, that would be amazing, right? But all inductive reasoning is demonstrably unsound because it's based on our memory. So, for example, if I'm shooting pool and I aim the cue ball at the 8 ball and I got it lined up and I shoot it and I get the 8 ball in the pocket. Perfect. Shot. Set it back up again exactly the same place. Shoot it again exactly the same way. How confident am I that I'm going to get the 8 ball in the pocket? Pretty confident. In it goes, right? I could keep doing that over and over again. Do I have proof that if I shoot that cue ball exactly the same way, that the 8 ball will go into the corner pocket? Nope. Because, well, what gives me my support is remembering it always working that way before. So I'm trusting my memory. Have you ever remembered something incorrectly?
Every day.
So you can't trust your memory. So memory of past experiences doesn't give us grounds for believing that the future experiences will be the same as the past. Well, guess what? All of science is inductive reasoning of that sort. So strictly speaking, science cannot prove anything. Which actually, that's why scientists argue that they're supporting a hypothesis. Right? You've heard that expression, but strictly speaking, the scientist that says he has proved such and such is not a very good scientist, because that's not the way scientists are allowed officially to speak today, because they can only support hypotheses which are a guess. This is our best guess. Now, the thing is, their guesses are incredibly good, and you would be a fool not to trust the kinds of guesses they get. I mean, I'm still thinking of how incredible this was. Did we look at this? You've seen that, right? No? Those were two of the booster rockets that helped boost his car out into space.
Elon Musk.
Remember? No?
I think I need to see it.
And they're trying to save money by having the booster rockets return to Earth so that they can reuse them. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Did you know there is a car in space right now? And the question you're probably thinking is, why? Well, the short answer to the question is because Elon Musk wanted it there. Elon Musk is the CEO of Tesla, which is probably the most well-known electric car company on the planet. And he is also the founder and CEO of SpaceX, the company behind the rocket Falcon Heavy. Falcon Heavy is a partially reusable super heavy lift launch vehicle, or in layman's terms, a reusable space rocket, designed and manufactured by SpaceX, and is now the most powerful rocket in operation. These cheesy publicity stunts, it was a clever show of cross-promotional marketing, being that both SpaceX and Tesla are owned by Elon Musk.
Well,
But as this was Falcon Heavy's make
No, but you don't need one. Does anybody need a break? Yes? Okay, let's take a break. I'll look for the launch of the car.